Why is it in ancient history, when we start to trace back all of the ancient mythologies and all of the ancient religions, why is it that we, for some weird reason, find the planet Saturn at the core of all of these concepts? This is not debatable. Saturn is fundamentally part of just about every, or maybe, no, not just about, no, probably every single creation mythology or creation religion. Saturn is sitting right there staring at us. The question is, why? What is going on? What the hell is happening here? Why would it be that all of our ancient ancestors, for some weird reason, decided to look up at the sky and be like, you know what, Rabobsies? I don't know what the hell they named each other back then. We're going with Rabobsies. I think what we should do is we should pick something out and we should worship it as the creator. Don't you believe so? And then Rabobsies' friend, Bob, is like, yeah, I think we should do that. Yeah, that's fun. What we'll do is we can look up at the sky and then we can pick one of those dots as the creator. Yeah. And then Rabobsies is all, yeah, I believe that is a good idea. Let's worship, I don't know, that particular dot in the sky, and we'll call it Saturn. Yeah, boy, that's good stuff right there. Now we can have something to worship and say that is what created everything. So that did not happen. I mean, maybe in like one, maybe two would be stretching it. But maybe one civilization in the past, maybe they would pick that particular point of light and say, you know what, that's our creator. That's where everything started, right? Maybe, right? But here's the problem. All ancient cultures, for some weird reason, decided to look up at the sky, point to Saturn, which would have been nothing less than a pinprick of light, and decide that is going to be the foundation of all of their creation mythologies or religions? Come on now. You have lost your mind if you think that is what happened. The reality is this. The reason why all of our ancient ancestors ended up putting Saturn at the core of all of their creation mythologies or religions is because the planet Earth used to orbit Saturn, and it used to orbit Saturn not too long ago. And by not too long ago, I'm not talking like, maybe like 1 billion years or 100 million years. No, I'm talking like 6, 7, maybe 10, 12,000 years ago, we used to orbit Saturn. What? Are you crazy? What do you mean we used to orbit Saturn? That is insane. This channel is dumb. I'm hitting that dislike button. Screw this dude. I'm out of here. If that just went through your head, hold on. Give me a second. Remember, keeping an open mind is crucial to scientific discovery. You cannot block out something just because you have been pre-programmed your entire life to think it. That is not how that works. So, why would I make the claim that we used to orbit Saturn not only just maybe billions of years ago? No. I'm talking we were orbiting Saturn up until maybe just 6, 7, 10,000 or so years ago. Very, very recent, relatively speaking. Now, the reason why this claim is being made, and by the way, it's not just me that's making this claim. It's not me that just woke up one day, took my crazy pills, and I was like, you know what I'll do? I'll tell everybody that we orbited Saturn. I did not do that. This has come from decades, and I mean decades of studying history and science. And the interesting part about the whole thing is, once again, I did not come up with this. I ran into the other countless researchers that have already been proving this for like hundreds of years. Like, this isn't even something new. It's only new to us right now because, the theory of uniformity, we have all this ridiculous science, this fictional scientific religion right now that plagues all of our psychologies. We are so used to hearing about that kind of science, quote unquote. It's not science, it's a religion, it's garbage. That any other possible explanation scientifically for any kind of a cosmological event or a historical event that happened within human memory or just human past in general is immediately met with some unbelievable hostility and an absolute closed-minded approach. This is the problem that plagues all of science in today's day and age, as well as historical research. All right, enough about the psychology. Let's get into the meat and bones about why it is believed that we used to orbit Saturn not too long ago. Now, this is actually, let's start here. Let's start with the time that we actually orbited Saturn. We do not have the precise date for when we stopped orbiting, I guess is what I should say. Like, there is a point in time, obviously, where Earth no longer orbits Saturn. Now, I have not seen any solid 100% proof that shows what date we essentially would have disengaged from our orbit around Saturn. So I just want to throw that out there so everybody understands that this whole thing is a work in progress. Now, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to show you guys several different angles of the theory, because once again, we have an issue when we start to go back further and further in time, right? You know, we, for whatever reason, right now anyway, are unable to escape the second law of thermodynamics. So as time passes, things just deteriorate, right? Stuff just breaks down and there's very little we can do about that. So in my opinion, it's important as a researcher to remember that we are always working against the unknown, and the reality is there's going to be stuff in historical research that very well may remain lost forever. And I only say that so that everybody remembers that there may not be that final piece of evidence that really locks in, the answer that we're looking for. Okay, I know I'm already talking bad about everything. All right, but that is a real problem that all historical researchers are going to be suffering from. The Saturn theory is no different. Now, the good news about the Saturn theory is that we have not only historical evidence on our side, like I've already started to talk about in the previous video, right? We have mythologies and we have religions that quite blatantly point out Saturn being at the central source of creation, reigning over a time that would essentially be called the Golden Age, right? This is that proverbial Golden Age back in the human past that for some weird reason all ancient cultures know of, right? It's weird that every single ancient human culture, for some weird reason, back to a certain point, believe that humans used to live in a golden age, and the golden age was reigned over by Saturn. So this puts us in a position to begin looking at this from the beginning, right? Let's start at the beginning, and when we get to the end, we'll stop. All right, so at the beginning, here's the deal. In a lot of people's creation myths, all right, you know what? Let's talk about the creation thing really quick. The first thing everybody needs to understand is I am not coming at this from a God perspective. I personally have none of those beliefs. I do not take anybody's side on this. I am not a militant atheist, nor am I religious. I am in the middle. In my opinion, both of the extreme sides are insane, and they need to get their stuff together. I mean, let's be honest, you guys are crazy. All right, anyway, so just so you understand where all of my information is going to be coming from, or I should say the perspective of where I'm coming from, we are going to try and stay as objective as possible, all right? All right, so the beginning, what do we have here? All right, so from the mythology historical perspective, and you know what, let's clarify this. What I want to do now is I want to get rid of the concept of mythology and religion, because that is ultimately not how this story is told by ancient cultures, right? When we start to go further and further back into ancient history, what we find is that we find the way mythologies and religions are told change. The further we go back, suddenly people are not necessarily worshiping the gods anymore, and the mythologies and religions start to sound more like just recounting of events and not, the reverence of a god. And that, I think, is important, because that's the key, because the people that we are talking about that existed during this golden age of Saturn, there's a good chance that they were not religious in the sense of how people think of religion nowadays, right? Because when you go farther back in time, These stories, they just sound like history, and that's it, right? The religion and the mythology part of it goes away, and it only seems like it's still there from the view of a modern person today because the stuff they are recording is out of your, it's crazy. I mean, it's out of your mind. Like, you read this stuff and like, what are you talking about? You know, a golden age where you didn't have to till the land and you didn't have to hunt. Everything was all good, right? You know, the entire earth was this perfect, lush environment. There was no issues. And this is a common theme amongst everybody back in the day. So this brings us to the next point that we have to go over. So if we find a commonality in ancient history, right? If we find that humans all over the planet, for some weird reason, are talking about the exact same situation, that's a scientific data point. I mean, that's really what that is, especially if you are on the mainstream side and want to say that diffusion never happened, right? That all of these peoples and cultures were spread all over hell and back and basically never talked to each other, right? If you take that position, you now have to somehow vindicate how all of these people have identical stories. It makes it very difficult. So what we can do now is, instead of just discarding it, which is what mainstream historians do, they don't care, they just move on. They just say, oh yeah, the people were cavemen, they just, I don't know, I guess they were psychologically prone to do it, and they did it. That is literally an excuse that some of the mainstream uses, by the way. They honestly believe that at some level, like baked into our DNA, we just all believe that, oh, I don't know, I guess we just had a creator, and that's just common to express itself in uneducated society. That is literally some of their position. It's the dumbest stuff you can imagine. The reality is, if everybody has the exact same story, there's probably a good chance that everybody was also then sharing the same experience on the planet. Now, this leads us to the next problem. All right, fine. We can say that the entire planet was a golden age. But if we put some sort of a golden age in the context of our current solar system, that doesn't necessarily work, does it? If we look at Earth now, we see that we have seasons. If you read the Golden Age mythologies or the history, everybody says that the concept of seasons did not exist. Right? This is another common theme in this Golden Age. There's no concept of winter, right? You didn't get cold, right? You have the Adam and Eve version in your mind where they're just walking around naked. It sounds like you could legitimately do that and be okay. I mean, it was kind of like that, right? But on the whole planet. Now, the Garden of Eden and all that stuff, that actually could have come from this. I'm not getting into all of that. I'm just using it as imagery to paint a picture. Do not take that as a literal religious thing, all right? So anyway, if the claim that Earth used to exist in some form of golden age, how do you explain that scientifically? What the hell do you do with that? All right, so let's just put a pin in that particular bullet point of information. All right, golden age, everybody's happy, no wars, peaceful, everybody's nude, it's all good in the hood. All right, what the hell does that have to do with Saturn? All right, so if we're going to accept that a golden age existed, because we're on this channel, I find it very important to take serious everybody's religious stories and mythologies. All right, now basically mainstream takes religion and mythology and throws it in the garbage, right? They don't take it seriously. And the few people that do take it seriously, they take it seriously in like a metaphorical sense, right? Like Zeus was a metaphor for power or whatever. You know, it's just dumb stuff, right? You know, they'll analyze like a Greek text, and instead of reading it literally, you know, they try to put all this other garbage in there and infer stuff, and there's no reason to do any of that, and nobody says to do that, but they do it anyway, and that's basically the extent of what the mainstream will do with a mythology or a religion. On this channel, let's take the mythologies as actual history. Let's just take the crazy stuff at face value. Right now, when we do that, obviously things get crazy, right? You start to read this stuff and you're like, what the hell are you talking about, dude? What do you mean, like, Saturn is in charge of time, or Saturn is the creator, or Jupiter is Zeus? What the hell are you talking about? Well, don't forget, anytime we come across the word God, all we will do is switch it with planet. If you start reading the history like that, everything changes. Suddenly, you have a better grasp on what may be being said in the texts. Now, when we go back in time, what we find is we find a golden age. Everybody's happy. Everybody's naked. But what we also find is there is this one particular point in the sky at the north, which is unanimously, which everybody talks about this point in the north as being the creator, as being the north central point, as being the father of all planets, of everything. You know, this is how all of these mythologies or the histories, they paint this picture. So we have a golden age, we have some form of a ball of light or something floating around up there in the North Pole. And by the way, the North is very important, as we'll get to in a second. But all ancient histories talk about the golden age being ruled by some sort of a center point at the North Pole, right? Okay, so the Northern Hemisphere has some sort of a thing going on up there, and the Earth is uniformly happy. Right? Don't we wish we lived in that right now? Yeah, right? Jesus. Anyway, so we read that, you're like, fine, okay, we can compare multiple, we can compare all kinds of religions, we can compare Chinese, Finnish, Indian, it doesn't matter. It does not, Roman, Greek, it doesn't matter. They all say the exact same thing. They may say it in their own way, but it's not like weird. I mean, it's pretty much direct, right? The Saturn is time. Saturn is the creator. Saturn is the all-knowing. Saturn is right there in the north. That's where it is. That is where it all stems from. That is in all ancient histories. There is nothing to argue there, by the way. We will go into that further in other episodes, but if you do not believe me and you want to go double check me, which is good, stop the video and go Google it really fast. Literally, it takes 2 seconds and you'll see that I am pointing you in the right direction. All right, so, and we will, like I said, we'll go over that in later videos. This is like 10 hours worth of schizo stuff here. All right, so if we are reading these histories or mythologies and we're trying to take them literal, we have a lot of problems scientifically, don't we? Right? Everything I've said doesn't make any sense, and it does not make sense because right now you are currently thinking about the Earth in the current solar system. All right? Right now, if we look around, we're obviously not in a golden age, right? There's obviously no ball of light at the North Pole that we are underneath, right? We have none of this. I mean, none of those data points line up with what we observe today. Now, this is where people will quit. Everyone will stop here. Not everyone. Most people hop off board here because they're like, well, I mean, what do you want me to do with that? How are you gonna claim that we orbited Saturn just like 10,000 years ago when mainstream cosmologists tell us that the solar system has existed in its current form for billions of years untouched? Okay, right there, we can now throw out mainstream cosmology. If mainstream cosmology wants to make the claim that the universe is filled with all of this insane stuff, right? Black holes, quasars, neutron stars, you have all of this stuff out there, the mainstream cosmology is happy to just call out and be like, yes, it's real, blah, blah, blah. If they're willing to say that, but then at the same time, they're willing to say that the current solar system has not been altered at all for billions of years, they've lost their mind. That is dumb. I mean, it's not only intellectually dishonest, it is stupid. Right? I don't remember who said it, but I think it was something like, the universe is out there to kill you. And I could not agree more. Right? So to think that the solar system has existed in its current state for billions of years is ridiculous. It's not only ridiculous, you don't come to that conclusion just by employing common sense. You come to that conclusion by using basic critical thinking skills. You do employ critical thinking skills against every mainstream piece of ideology that you believe in, right? You don't just blindly take what the scientists, quote unquote, say at face value, do you? Because that is not the scientific method. If that is how you are currently operating, unfortunately, you are not operating within science, You are operating on faith, and faith is not tolerated in science. So that's bad news for a lot of atheists out there. Don't ever forget that part. Now, I'm not talking bad about you guys. I just say this because nobody else is going to tell you this, and also tell you that it's okay to work around it and break out of that shell. All right, that's self-improvement. Well, no, I'm not doing that right now. Okay. All right, back to Saturn. So, if we are going to look at the solar system in its current form and apply that to, I'm making the claim, 10-ish thousand, maybe 15-ish thousand years, maybe 6,000 years ago, I don't know. We don't have a date, like I said. But obviously, if we employ what we currently see in the solar system and try to add us orbiting Saturn, it doesn't work, right? And it doesn't work because the theory of uniformity doesn't allow us to do anything, right? The solar system exists in its current state. Now, what I just said is that we can throw away that concept of the solar system being the way you see it now for hundreds of millions or billions of years, because we have no evidence for it. It is very important for everybody to understand the three-body problem or the n-body problem. Right? What that basically means is that you can calculate with very good accuracy the physics of two objects and to see what they're going to do with each other. You can do that. You can put the parameters in, you're good, no problem. But the very second you add a third body, it becomes impossible to predict where those bodies are going to go and how they are going to interact with one another over time. Don't believe me? That's fine. There's probably 8 million different math videos out there on it. Go watch those guys. They'll explain it. Just know that that's a real concept and that we cannot look at the current solar system now and work backwards to try to infer what our system looked like, say, a billion years ago. We cannot do that. That is not scientific. It's not in the realm of real physics. It has nothing to do with real cosmology. It is a fantasy propagated by mainstream cosmologists so they can continue to get a paycheck. That is like literally it. It is impossible for them to make a claim to know the orbits of any planet, any object in our solar system 100 million years ago, a billion years ago, or 10,000 years ago. They don't know. Even earlier. They can't infer it. It does not work. Now, with that fact in our hand, and we will now use this as a real scientific fact, we know that we do not know what the solar system looked like 10,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. We don't know for sure. Now, what can we do with this? What that means is now we can actually say scientifically that it is possible that Earth could have been orbiting Saturn. All right. Now, I realize your butt just puckered. I get it. The claim is still crazy because you are used to the theory of uniformity and mainstream cosmology. But factually, scientifically, the claim can absolutely be made that Earth used to orbit Saturn to some degree, in some shape or form. Right? That is a scientific claim that cannot be disregarded. You've got to allow that if you believe in the scientific method. Okay, so we're going to allow it. We are going to follow the evidence. We are going to follow the scientific method. And we're just going to see where this takes us. All right, so now the next question is, okay, fine. We can say we're orbiting Saturn. When you say orbiting Saturn, what do you mean, though? I mean, are you meaning like Saturn was the sun? Or is Saturn like it is now and we were orbiting it like the rings and its moons do? Like, what the hell are you talking about? That's a good question. The next question that should also pop up is, how does Earth stay warm? And that maybe is the first question we should also ask, right? So if we're going to claim there's a golden age, that would infer that there had to have been no snow, which means it was probably a good climate, a nice relaxing climate, but where does the heat come from? Because right now, when we look at Saturn, Saturn does not output the kind of heat that would be required to even heat up Earth like we are now, right? I mean, it wouldn't work now. How the hell is Saturn heating up Earth to the point to where the entire planet is somehow uniformly warm? And those are fantastic questions. Remember, we have to ask questions about everything all the time, no matter what. We question everything. All right, so we have to figure out how we get Earth orbiting Saturn. And we have to figure out how somehow Earth was surviving, because remember, the Golden Age, the way the Golden Age is described, is that it's not just, like the way anything is today. I mean, the planet was lush. The planet had flora and fauna that literally does not exist in today's day and age. So somehow you've got to support all that. Like, how the hell does that happen? So right now, if we take Earth and we kick it over to Saturn in its current form, Earth will not survive. You are correct. As far as I know, as far as I can tell, if I were to grab Earth, throw it into orbit around Saturn, we would not have the outcome that our ancient ancestors claim that they had when they were orbiting Saturn. So how the hell do we get Earth to survive around an orbit of Saturn? Among other questions that we have to ask. All right, so here's the point. Saturn in its current form is not what Saturn was just 5, 10, 12,000 plus years ago. Saturn now is a gas giant. That's what we classify it. Saturn back then was a brown dwarf star. And yes, I can feel your blank gazes or your mouths dropping open or whatever shock and surprise. You're like, what the hell are you talking about? You're saying that Saturn was a brown dwarf star and we orbited? What the hell is going on, dude? Saturn is nothing like that right now. Hold on. Saturn is absolutely like a switched off brown dwarf star. This, of course, begs the next question. What do you mean a switched off brown dwarf star? I mean, what the hell is going on, man? It just gets weirder and weirder. All right, so I'm going to lay out the basics here, and then we will continue this in further episodes because there is a lot to cover to really build a case for this. But here is the general idea. 10, 12, 6, whatever, 1,000 years ago or so. Somewhere around there. And like I said, we still do not have the exact date. All right, for various reasons, right? Not only just the second law of thermodynamics, but Earth has also gone through its share of cataclysms since we were kicked out of orbit from Saturn. So there's a whole lot of problems that we are facing. So here's the deal. Back in the day, at some point in time, Earth was orbiting the brown dwarf Saturn, right? And it was not just Earth. It appears that Mars was orbiting there with us. Eventually, Venus shows up. That's a later part of the story. We'll get into that. And there were probably other bodies as well orbiting Saturn. Now, when I say orbiting a brown dwarf, you're probably thinking of something kind of like our current solar system, right? Fine, there's a brown dwarf in the middle, and we're rotating around it. Okay, it's a little crazy, but if you have been paying attention to, lately cosmology, even cosmologists are finding planets, rotating around brown dwarfs. This is a fact, right? We are starting to find other objects rotating around brown dwarfs. However, so that's nice, that works for us, but that is not where we were. A brown dwarf has something called a plasma sheath. A plasma sheath encompasses the entire brown dwarf, and it gives off a sort of reddish, bluish spectrum of light, radiation, basically. Obviously, all light is electromagnetic radiation. Yeah, whatever. Anyway, so a brown dwarf has what's known as a plasma sheath. Now, right now, you're probably like, what? Okay, fine, you're going to start talking about other stuff, but wait a second. If a star is a nuclear explosion constantly happening, right? Right now, we have mainstream pushing the whole thermonuclear cope theory, but the reality is stars are not thermonuclear. That has nothing to do with any of that. They are not tons of atomic explosions going off every second. That's ridiculous. And to make that theory work, the amount of theoretical garbage that has been injected into that entire science is hilarious. I mean, it is absolutely hilarious. And the fact that it is pushed as fact nowadays is even worse. It's just a joke. Anyway, let's get rid of all of that stuff. And I know that sounds crazy for those of you who are new to this, but just roll with me, right? Like I said, this is going to take like 20,000 episodes to go over. But here's the premise. Back in the day, Earth was rotating around Saturn. Saturn was a brown dwarf during this time period. Earth was not rotating outside of the brown dwarf. Earth was in an orbit inside the plasma sheath of a brown dwarf. Now, if you're like, what are you, that's crazy, dude. You cannot possibly be inside of a star. That's insane. I'm turning this off. You're dumb. No, wait, hold on. You can literally say that right now, we orbit inside the sun's plasma sheath, and we are alive and well. You can scientifically make that comparison. So, if you want to remain true to the scientific method, you have to hang on and keep listening, because so far we are still well within the range of real science. Now, we have Earth rotating inside the plasma sheath of Saturn. Now, at this point in time, Saturn was quite a bit larger, right? So what we have right now is Saturn is a turned off brown dwarf, and we'll get into the science of that later. But back in the day, when Saturn was a huge brown dwarf, relatively speaking, right? Relatively speaking, Earth would find itself in a position to where it would be receiving an equal amount of warmth from within that plasma sheath all over the entire surface of the planet. Now, remember, brown dwarfs are not these incredibly ungodly hot situations, right? They don't radiate at that level. So it is not weird to think that a planet could actually be revolving inside the plasma sheath of a brown dwarf, right? Even more to the point, we now have mainstream scientists, while they're on the sidelines, they're on the fringes, I guess I should say, we have started to see those scientists starting to speculate that perhaps a planet could rotate inside the plasma sheath. They don't call it the plasma sheath. What do they call it? I don't know what they call it anymore. It's some dumb name, but it's a plasma sheath. That's really what it is. That's the physical thing that it is, right? Even more interesting is that when the telescopes that they're using now, what they're finding when they look at brown dwarfs, they're finding them to be like splotchy on the inside. And they're not entirely sure why. What they're blaming that splotchiness on is weather. It's not weather. It's other planets orbiting within the plasma sheath. So the good news here is that if you want to discard this, that's fine, but you'll have to admit that you are not operating within observable scientific fact. We are starting to find more and more evidence to prove that it's entirely possible for a planet to orbit within the plasma sphere of a brown dwarf. Now, let's join this with our ancestors, because I'm getting too much rambling. All right. So, now let's look back in the past. Now, obviously, you're going to have to roll with me on what I've said so far, and we'll build up the case and the details for the brown dwarf situation in further episodes. So hang on. Let's tie this together, and then we'll stop the video so that we can go back to living our life and stop wasting our time. Or I guess you can go back to wasting your time. I don't care. Whatever. So here's the deal. All of our ancestors, they say that we lived in a golden age where the earth was uniformly warm, was lush, blah, 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 all of that stuff. They didn't have to worry about anything. That sounds weird until we add the science of the possibility of orbiting a brown dwarf star within the plasma sheath. Suddenly, we start to see a picture of a scientifically possible environment. That's what we see. That's where the evidence leads us, right? Now, the next question that I posed here, we have Saturn, and it sounds like Saturn's at the North Pole. What? Okay, so we're orbiting, but Saturn's at the North Pole. How the hell does that work? How is Saturn at the north the central point if we're orbiting around it? So here's the deal. There's two competing main theories, and they might actually both be correct depending on what phase of the Saturn situation we're talking about. The first idea is that we were orbiting within the brown dwarf Saturn, like you would think today's orbits, like we orbit the sun, right? Just going around it in the ecliptic plane, you know, if you want to call it that. Happy, whatever, we're going around it. Then, at some point in time, and we'll go into this in the next show, our orbit starts to change. And then as our orbit starts to change, we start to migrate down to the south pole of Saturn. Now, as that happens, there's a point in ancient history that recalls, or I mean, this is where all the points come in, that Saturn would have been at the north. So this is where that history would have started, once Earth made its way down to the southern pole of Saturn, and then was then locked into that polar orbit underneath Saturn. So that's one theory, that we started in a quote-unquote regular orbit and migrated down for various reasons that we will get into later. The other theory is that we were always locked into a south polar orbit, and that all of our ancestors, every time they looked to the north, they would have seen Saturn. And this particular theory makes it sound like we were never orbiting anywhere other than the south polar locked-in orbit. And we'll cover that in another show as well. Either way, at some point in time, if we listen to our ancestors, Saturn was in the North Pole, and it was huge, right? It was not this little pinprick of light either. You know, Saturn would have been this huge glowing ball of plasma, basically. And we'll go into that as well later. But when our ancestors are looking to the north, what are they seeing? Right? They're seeing the south pole of Saturn. Now, when they're looking to that, what does that look like? Well, wow. It may actually have looked like this. Guess what a ton of mythologies and religions deify? The cube. Why do they deify a cube? Where did that imagery come from deep within our past? Why does the cube matter? Or why does the star matter? Well, sure enough, they would have seen what you see on the screen now, possibly. And that shape is what would have stuck in their minds, because that would have been the symbol of the Creator. Now, we have only just scratched the very surface of this topic, and it goes insanely deep. And make no mistake, it is 100% relevant to today and your personal life. For those of you listening, what I have on the screen is a picture of the North Pole storm on Saturn, and this storm is in the shape of a hexagon. All right, we will continue on in the next videos. This is going to take some time, but don't forget, we will continue to approach this through a scientific eye and with a respect to our ancient ancestors' histories.